Where was the pointy part? Was the pointy part in here, or was the pointy part out there? Up there. And what was the feeling when you looked at the eyes?
It was scary.
Mm-hmm. And what scary? Why? What made it scary?
The eyes looked evil.
Evil. Mm-hmm. And what was evil about them? Say what you mean by evil.
It looked evil because it was just staring at me.
With what? Staring at you as if what? As if to do what?
As if it wanted to come and take us.
As if it wanted to come and take you. That was the feeling you got? That it wanted you to go with it? Did you feel like you wanted to go with it? No. Did you feel, what was the effect on you when you felt it wanted to have you go with it?
I just walked away and I started crying.
My friend Philip here was trying to find a way over the stream, and I was looking at the bushes up the top of the trees. And then suddenly this silver cigar-shaped object seemed to pop up from behind the bushes and trying to take off. Then it disappeared again.
Well, I saw the spaceship. I didn't see the man. The spaceship, it looked a cigar shape with a dome on it. And it had a yellowy, orange to red light on the top of it.
How clearly did you see it?
Well, I couldn't see its face because it was too far away.
Oh, you say you saw a man as well, did you?
Yes.
And what about him?
Well, he was too far away to be seen as well.
Are you sure it wasn't perhaps just a helicopter or an aircraft from the airfield near here?
A helicopter could land there, but that's private property over there. And if they landed there, they could be prosecuted. And with an aircraft, the only thing that could get in there was a Harrier.
Were you frightened at the time?
Yes.
Why?
I thought there would be a whole arm inside there or something.
I was precipitating various chemicals in order to make crystals, and I just happened to be looking out the window, thinking how to fudge my science report. What I saw directly south was something that I'd never seen before.
We were out playing sport on the oval. One of the kids yelled out, look up in the sky, you know, it's flying saucers. And I remember we all looked up, and it really was a flying saucer. I mean, from what you imagine, a flying saucer, it was a round silver disc, and it seemed to be very low over the school, and I remember kids screaming and running inside.
This student came in, was hysterical, leaned up against a sliding door, screaming, "There's a flying saucer in the oval." And of course everybody started to head towards the door, and the teacher said, "Sit down, it's not recess yet," and a few minutes later the bell went off.
Everyone started moving, like a whole lot of zebras being terrified by crocodiles. I went where the herd went. Barbara Robbins was the chemistry teacher at the time. She just grabbed a camera and started clicking.
I went into the staff room. Because I knew I wouldn't have a chance to have a cup of tea any other time, I went to get a cup of tea. And then because I was a smoker, and this is something that has stayed with me for 42 years.
Yes. I
lit up a cigarette, and so I don't know how much I delayed before I went outside.
Everyone just took off out into the oval. In time to see it lifting off from the oval. It was probably, 50 feet or more in the air at that stage.
I see Andrew Greenwood, the science teacher, coming towards me, and he said, "Did you see it? Did you see it?" And he pointed up in the air, and I said, "No, see what?" I have a very, very clear picture of him, and I remember almost exactly what he said. And he said it was up in the sky, it moved at incredible speeds, it hovered, it seemed to go away, and there seemed to be light planes. He thought Cessnas he thought they were actually checking it out from the Melbourne airport. Yeah. And they were circling around it.
Why do you think they might want us to be scared?
Because because we don't look after the planet, the area properly.
Mm-hmm. And is this an idea that you have had before, that we don't look after the planet properly in the air, or did this idea come to you when you had this experience?
When I had this experience.
Mm-hmm. And how did that idea come to you from this experience? This is a little hard, but try to be with me here, okay? How did this idea come to you when you had this experience?
I just felt all horrible inside.
You felt horrible. At what point did you feel that? When you saw the craft, or when you got home at night? Or
when I got home.
You had that horrible feeling when you got home?
Yes.
And say more about that horrible feeling, Lisa. What was it like?
It was like the world, all the trees will just go down and there will be no air and people will be dying.
Mm-hmm. And those thoughts came to you, had you had those thoughts before this experience?
No.
No. And how did those thoughts come to you? Did they come to you from the craft or from...
From the man.
The man. And did the man say those things to you? How did he get that across to you?
Well, he never said anything. It's just that the face is the eyes.
What was the sense you got from those eyes?
He was interested.
5 degrees elevation. We acquired this unknown object. T1 control doesn't know what type of aircraft it is either.
Remote-controlled cameras monitor the 7,700 square miles of airspace above the Nellis Range. The cameras record fighter jet training, tactical exercises, and in at least one case, this UFO. The video from a tracking location known only as S-30 was fed into Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas. Personnel there monitor what is supposed to be classified data about aircraft runs over the 3 million acres of desert that make up the Nellis Range. An unknown aircraft making its way onto the complex, says aerospace journalist Bill Sweetman, is not considered standard operating procedure.
I don't think you'd really see many objects wandering in by accident. They're very, very careful to ensure that sort of thing doesn't happen. The potential for serious accidents if somebody is really straying into the range is very, very serious.
And yet, something obviously did stray in, and it frightened the camera's remote-controlled operators.
This craft shows up, and it's like they're playing with kids. It's like, do whatever they want and buy now. That's scary.
I've never seen anything like this before. This was my first encounter seeing anything of this nature. And I've been working the ranges for close to 10 years.
It seemed to move in whichever direction it wanted to go whenever it wanted to, contrary to any aircraft that I've seen in the past.
Chuck DeCaro is a former member of U.S. Special Forces, specializing in state-of-the-art military technology. He has analyzed hours of video footage of supposed UFOs, debunking many. But he has never seen anything like the Nellis UFO.
In my first look at that tape, I said, wow. And I continue to say, wow. There are only 3 things that could be on that tape. One is a very elaborate and very expensive hoax. I don't think that's what we're seeing. The second is some kind of a black project, a secret project that has some very unusual aerodynamic characteristics. And the third, if you can eliminate all those aerodynamic answers, could be a true unknown. And if that is an unknown, if you can come to that conclusion, you've got a pretty interesting piece of history right there.
To rule out the possibility of a hoax, Sightings asked a government subcontractor who uses the same image analysis computer as the Department of Defense to analyze the S-30 tapes. He has asked to remain anonymous.
The video appears to be genuine. Specifically, it was taken by contractor personnel that are operating tracking sites for the United States Air Force.
Could the Nellis UFO be a rare glimpse at a military black project? The stealth bomber is one former black project tested in Nevada and early on misidentified by civilians as a UFO. But our sources insist that when black projects are tested, the tracking cameras are deactivated.
The camera operators in the tracking sites are not exposed to those highly classified aircraft on a typical basis.
Chuck DeCaro and the government video engineer compared notes on the possibility that this UFO was a black project.
What's startling about it is that it doesn't resemble any shapes that I would know immediately. And that's why I thought it was interesting to start with.
It almost appears to be like spherical in the center and with a appendage on the bottom and on the top. You don't see any evidence of rotors.
No. And also the startling thing is it seems to change shape.
Another anomalous characteristic of the object is its apparent ability to change shape instantaneously.
The physical profile of the object changes almost frame to frame. Sometimes it appears almost to be a fuzzy, gassy cloud. In some portions of the video, it appears to be several spherical objects surrounding a dark mass.
To get a better look at the flight characteristics of the Nellis UFO, Sightings consulted with Chip Peterson, a video processing expert. He stabilized and enhanced several minutes of the S-30 video.
I basically moved each frame, and you can see the frames actually moving now, showing the degree that I had to move the image in order to keep this object stable in the center.
The stabilized image clearly shows the odd shape of the object shifting and turning in the sky.
I then took the numbers one by one and reconstructed the flight path, and that's the only way I could determine what the actual motion was, and I recreated that in 3 dimensions. It's initially heading away from the camera, and it abruptly changes, and during this phase, the range is increasing. It's actually going away from the camera. And at this point, it changes direction. Wind wouldn't do that. It wouldn't change that abruptly. And it wouldn't follow a constant radius throughout this entire portion here. It's all at constant distance from the camera. It's as if it's observing the ground position just as the ground is observing it and maintaining this constant distance.
Based on his knowledge as an aerospace engineer, Peterson offered one possible explanation for the abrupt turns performed by the UFO.
You could interpret it as if it determined it was on radar at this point. Perhaps if you're on radar, of course, you can sense that in all of our fighter planes. You know when you're being tracked. As soon as you get a lock or you get this radar signal, it would seem to me that this object was interested in who's observing it, and it turned in order to find out.
When something starts to change shape like that in the air, you become very, very puzzled because you realize that you're looking at something that appears to involve a whole new technology that we don't understand. What you want to do, of course, is go and find the person who's invented this and say, whatever made you think of that, and what does it do, and how does it do it?
But we will probably never know who created this new technology. Questions about the earthly or otherworldly origins of the Nellis UFO are unanswerable. Until the mastermind behind this craft comes forward, there is only speculation and fear.
It's like us viewing an ant farm. And the ants think they're it. That's the scary part.
There's 2 types that I see. One type is about 3 feet tall, very dark, very ugly, not humanoid at all. The others are very, very tall, very lizard-looking, not pleasant.
The creatures that I have seen mostly have been the grays.
And when I say tall, I'm not talking 6 feet, I'm talking very tall, like 10 feet tall.
Usually about 3 to 4 foot tall. Real big, almond-shaped, black eyes.
The face was oval. The being itself couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall. It was sitting cross-legged at the top left-hand corner of my bed.
Crazy? Off the planet? Out of their tree? Well, probably. But you certainly wouldn't come here to Harvard University to look for support for those beliefs. In the great tradition of the great universities, Harvard is dedicated to the search for truth, the highest standards of intellectual inquiry. But now, the Harvard University Medical School is embracing little grey men. Little grey men from outer space who actually abduct humans.
After I'd worked with 40 or 50 of these individuals, I discovered to my amazement that there simply was no psychiatric explanation of this, that something real had happened to them.
Dr. John Mack is Professor of Psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School. Professor Mack has spent the last few years listening to some people with very strange stories. Are there common factors to these experiences?
Absolutely. The typical story, this would be a condensation of an abduction incident, say. Person is driving along in their car. They may hear a strange humming. They may see a UFO up close, or they may just see the light, powerful light coming down over the car. They feel that the car is no longer in their control. And next thing they know, they're being taken by this light or by some energy. They may see 2, 3 more of these small beings. The most 80 to 90% of them are these little grays with these huge black eyes and rather pear-shaped heads and somewhat spindly bodies. And they are transported up on this energy to the UFO, sometimes through a smaller vehicle, and then that vehicle goes up into the larger mothership.
Now this is so silly, it's funny. But you can't so simply dismiss a man of Professor Mack's standing. In the field of psychiatry, he's highly regarded. He won a Pulitzer Prize for his acclaimed biography of Lawrence of Arabia. And his current study of alien abduction is published by Macmillan's, a respected company, and it's a bestseller.
What has happened to these people is what they say has happened to them, even though I fully recognize that that's not possible in the worldview in which they and I were raised.
Well, then how is it possible?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Either we try to shrink the phenomenon into something where it, as far as I can tell, won't fit, or we're going to have to stretch our notions of the possible.
Well, we shouldn't be so open-minded that we're flabby, you know. There's a certain limit to open-mindedness, and this is it.
Dr. Paul McHugh is also a professor of psychiatry at the very prestigious Johns Hopkins Medical School in Baltimore. He says Dr. Mack's theories are utter nonsense. Well, Doctor, is the profession embarrassed when one of your colleagues puts forward theories like this?
Oh, yes, we're very embarrassed, and embarrassed for the profession and a little worried about John himself. You know.
What, he's gone off the rails a bit?
Well, John is a man of great gift and great intelligence, but he's also a man who tends to take on enthusiasms, and in this time he's gone too far. We're worried about him. We hope he'll pull himself together and come back.
I mean, do you think that Dr. Mack is off the rails?
Off the rails? What does that mean?
Well, he's a little deranged. Dr. Melkar Notman is the chairman of John Mack's faculty at Harvard. That means she's his boss. But she doesn't think that believing in little grey men is grounds for dismissal.
You know, we've all had those experiences in which you decide something is utter nonsense, and then you really learn that maybe half of it is utter nonsense, and the other half you really should have paid attention to. And I think we've all had that happen, so that I think we don't want to leap in and say you've got to leave the faculty because what you're doing is, you know, bizarre or nonsense.
Doctor, do you believe that there are little grey men out there?
I personally don't believe any of it.
Blue men?
Any kind of little grey men.
6 foot, 3 foot, 9 foot?
Well, my experiences started when I was very young. I can remember as far back as 6 years old, you know, being in my room, being, you know, just going to bed, and then aware that there were 6 light shafts coming down through the ceiling and would stand around my bed and start turning into a human-like looking form.
They do seem to be able to walk through walls and materialize. I thought For a while they were ghosts when I was younger, but these beings materialize into a physical form, so it's hard to say. They might be from another dimension, so to speak, or anything like that.
This being rushed at me across the bed. She had a tool in her hand and she was performing some mysterious procedure on me.
What did it involve?
I wasn't allowed to lift my head, so all I could see was what I could see looking down across my face. And I saw the tool. I don't even want to know what she was doing. It was horrible. It was frightening, and it lasted a long time.
Yeah, they aren't quote-unquote.
For those who have been abducted by aliens, there's a support group with its headquarters just 5 minutes from Harvard. Most of the abductees seem to live near Boston and are patients of Dr. Mack, which makes you wonder how the aliens choose their victims.
I have no idea how the abductees are chosen. They seem to cut across every socioeconomic level. They seem to be, this is kind of paradoxical since everyone's always trying to blame this on psychopathology, they seem to be unusually mentally sound. In other words, they seem to pick people who are particularly strong, stable, open-minded.
I'm not saying that these people who are making these claims are wild people in themselves. They have just developed a wild idea. And we have plenty of patients and plenty of people that have quite strange and false ideas about themselves. For example, feeling that they're a woman when they're a man, or feeling they're fat when they're as thin as a rake. We have all kinds of people like that, and we try to help them to see reality for what it is, not go along with their idea as though they were the judges of truth.
There's a certain sensation that you feel when they are around. It's not something you go looking for. It's all of a sudden, it's a sensation within your cell structure, actually.
Has Professor Mack been a helper?
He's been a big help. The biggest thing he's done for me is because of who he is. I went to him because I really wanted him to tell me that, I was hallucinating, or there was something physiologically wrong with me, or maybe I was just plain crazy. And he didn't. And after listening to me, and he looked me right in the eye and said, you're not crazy.
Is it possible that Dr. Mack has stumbled upon a whole new area of psychiatry?
No. In fact, all he has discovered is a phenomenon that's been known to psychiatry for decades. In fact, here in this
According to Dr. McHugh, the type of stories told by John Mack's patients were first classified as false memories in a psychiatric textbook published in 1912. Is there any danger in what he's doing?
Oh, I think there is, yes, and I quite clearly believe that these patients that he is claiming have been abducted, do have psychological problems, and those problems are being masked by this idea that the explanation is this crazy one.
Did you ever think you were going crazy?
No. Nope. The only thing that I thought might be possible is that there was something that was causing a very consistent experience. What that something was, I didn't know, but I never thought that I was crazy.
In its long and distinguished history, Harvard University has given the world some notable discoveries. It's just hard to believe, though, that aliens from outer space is one of them. John Mack may be off with the pixies, or the aliens, but he still draws a healthy salary, and Harvard professors are never, ever sacked. Well, sir, Harvard professor or not, anyone who believes what you do would believe anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's really not a matter of believing, Richard. I mean, I think to me this was utterly not possible when I first heard about it, and I didn't write about it, I didn't speak publicly about it for 2 years. This grew out of the experiences of case after case after case, so it was not like believing anything. I came cautiously, reluctantly, gradually to take this as seriously as I did.
He's taken up an idea that, well, it's at its root incoherent. It doesn't make any sense. And he has no evidence for it either. The two of those things combined makes you think that John has lost it this time.
In the end, Professor McHugh says it's not a laughing matter. Psychiatrists have a duty of care for their patients.
One can propose almost anything in relationship to reality, but eventually the time has come to prove it and not simply assert it.
What the source of this is, who these beings are, where they come from, what creates this intelligence, I don't know. But there's something profoundly important going on here that is authentic and real.
The Canadian township of West Carleton lies 40 miles north of the Canadian-United States border in the province of Ontario. Life in West Carleton is usually unremarkable, but late in 1991, one resident had an extraordinary experience. On August 18th at around 10 p.m., Diane Labanek had just put her children to bed. Her husband was out running an errand when the dogs began to howl.
I walked right to the window and I saw flames right on the back of the field. Extremely red flames and lots of smoke. It didn't look like a fire. I know what a fire looks like when you start a fire out there, and the grass was very dry, so if you start a fire, you will see it moving, whether this way or closer to the woods, and the fire was standing on one spot only. I saw a ship coming down close to the flames. Right on top of the ship, I saw a blue flashing light, and another light was on the bottom, very bright. I didn't know what to do. I was looking at it for about 10 minutes or so. And then the ship went a little bit back over the trees, and it disappeared. I saw all the flames turn out at the same time. I don't think I'd like to see it again. It's very scary. I've lived here for many, many years, and I have never been so scared in my life. It did enter my mind to phone the police. When this was all over, I came to the telephone, but I said, what am I going to tell them? I'm going to tell them I have seen flares out there at 10 o'clock or past 10 o'clock at night, and there was a ship up there. Who is going to say, okay, Diane, that's fine, we're coming over? So that's why I didn't call.
According to Labanek, 10 minutes after the mysterious lights abruptly blinked out, a helicopter appeared, just as unexpectedly. The unmarked craft flew low to the ground, over the field where the unexplained lights had appeared. After crisscrossing the area, it flew over Diane's house and rushed off into the night. At the crack of dawn, Diane Labanek ran out to the empty fields which surround her house, searching for evidence of the previous night's events.
I searched everything. There was no marks, there was no spots, there was no matches, there was just nothing. The only person I told is my mom and my husband. It kind of bothered me inside for a long, long time, not to come up forward and say it to anybody. But when I went out on the field and I could not find anything, who is going to believe me that this really happened? So I kept it to myself.
The 1991 sighting was a second unusual event Diane Labanek had witnessed in West Carleton. In 1989, she was one of several residents who observed a sudden explosion of extraordinarily brilliant light over a nearby swamp. Labanek might have remained silent about the 1991 episode, if not for this controversial videotape, which seems to verify her account. The tape was mailed to the office of a UFO researcher, and tonight it will be shown for the first time ever on national television. In February of 1992, 6 months after Labanek's sighting, a package from Canada arrived at the Edgewater, Maryland office of Bob Exler. A former NASA mission specialist, Exler is now a well-known UFO researcher. The package had no return address. Inside were documents, pictures, a map, and the videotape, all pertaining to the 1991 incident at West Carleton.
Most unusual, there seemed to be somewhat of a symbol with regard to the videotape. On the label was the name Guardian, and it was accompanied by a fingerprint. Guardian, to me, was an enigma, certainly nothing I had heard about in the UFO literature, so it was a mystery starting from scratch.
At the time, Exler was unaware of Labanek's sighting, but he would later find that the video depicted what she has reported with stunning accuracy. The tape showed a cluster of brightly burning red flames similar to flares. To the right hovered a dark disc-like object emitting a bright glow from its underside. The object was capped by a rapidly strobing blue light. It is among the most convincing documentations of a UFO Exler had seen in his 12 years of research.
It was clearly a disc-looking shape. We could resolve that because the flashing light on top would reflect off of the curved surface of the disc. I got a sense initially that this was a real event occurring in a field as opposed to some prop set up in a room somewhere. It had such an extraordinary amount of luminosity characteristic to it that I kind of had a sense I might be dealing with something that was potentially authentic here.
The map sent with the videotape shows the area of West Carleton, Canada, as a location where the tape had been made. Exler went to West Carleton, along with UFO researcher Graham Lightfoot.
Diane, can you tell us exactly what you saw that night?
Together they interviewed Diane Labanek, whom Lightfoot had met when he investigated her 1989 sighting.
Yes, I've seen a bright light.
What time of the day was this? This was at night, eh?
Yes, it was at night. I would say about 10 o'clock.
To their surprise, Labanek described exactly what the two researchers had seen on Guardian's videotape.
It was white.
When we talked to Diane about the sighting, asked her had she seen anything, her description was so vivid that it's something I didn't think she could have made up. She had not seen a tape, she had no idea what we knew, and yet she was able to describe things that we already knew from the tape.
And when he showed me the tape, it was exactly what I've seen. And it was still scary for me, but at least I had something to go by. Something that now I can tell the people, because now I have a little bit more evidence.
It's one of the clearest videos I've seen that show a structured object.
Dr. Bruce Maccabee, a U.S. Navy physicist and photoanalyst, has studied UFOs for years.
And here's the beacon light, with a blue light evidently, a reflection down here on the body of the craft, the outline of the object itself that you can see, some sort of dark lines that appear. Some brightness structure indicating something that's generating light is hanging down below the object. It's generating green light as well as blue light. Probably there is other structure in here, which, however, the glare from this bright light is blurring out.
Dr. Maccabee, who believes the tape is not a hoax, was particularly intrigued by the bright, strobing light.
Now, first of all, it's an unusual one because it's blue, and it's very fast. It was running about 7 cycles per second. This is much faster than ordinary flashing beacons on aircraft, for example, that typically run about 1 flash per second or maybe 2 flashes per second. The section of the video which shows the object just sort of appearing over a rise is quite convincing to me. It would be what you would expect if somebody were in the field trying to get closer to it and not knowing how close he could get. And so he turns on his camera while he's walking. He knows he's going to come up over a rise and see it, and you can see in the video farther and farther down until you see the whole device. Suddenly the light coming towards him gets brighter and brighter. You get a great big diffuse reflection or image in the camera, which suggests to me that this object shined a blue beam right at him.
Dr. Maccabee estimated the unknown object to be 20 to 30 feet in diameter. According to Exler, the object's apparent size argues against it being a hoax.
Is the world-renowned UFO researcher portrayed in Steven Spielberg's movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind? Let's all welcome Dr. Jacques Vallée. Now, I didn't realize until just sitting here talking to you that you didn't do this for a living, track UFOs. You?
No, I was trained as an astronomer, and my interest started actually as an astronomer at Paris Observatory.
So what piqued your interest? How did you get interested in all this?
We were tracking satellites. We were working for the French government, and this was in the early days of the space program. And we started tracking things that should not have been there, that were truly unidentified. And one night we got enough data points on one of these objects that we would have been able to run that tape through a computer and compute an orbit and try to see it again. And the man in charge of the project actually confiscated that tape and erased it out of fear of ridicule. And that's really what started my interest, because scientists are not supposed to do that.
Yeah. Now you got your hands on government files and...
Later, when I moved to the United States, I had the privilege of working with the man who was the scientific consultant for the U.S. Air Force, Dr. Hynek, at Northwestern, and I spent 4 years in my spare time going through 11,000 cases of the Air Force files.
Now, what does the Air Force say?
Well, much of that could be explained. I mean, it's 80%, at least 80% of all the cases are in fact mirages and reflections and known phenomena. But you're left with thousands of cases that are not explainable. And the Air Force would try to explain them away with completely ridiculous explanations. I remember one case where the witness saw something that he thought was a large bird at first, but it had 4 lights. And the Air Force explained it as a bird with 4 lights. That was the official explanation. It's still in the file.
Way to go, guys. Hey, how many sightings do they have that they can't explain?
There is some argument about that, but it's in the official files close to 1,000 that are unidentified according to their...
Why did they want to cover all this stuff up?
It was, well, first, to the credit of the Air Force, every time they went to the scientific community did not want to touch it. There is, as Marina said earlier, there is an arrogance in the scientific community. No, don't bother me with a phenomenon that doesn't fit.
Because scientists want to base every single thing on fact, right?
Well, yeah. and there are lots of facts, but there is a lack of good scientific research in this field, and I think it's a crime. I think the government data should be turned over to the scientific community, and there should be some level of activity within the scientific community to look at it.
Because this goes on all over the world, right? All different governments have
absolutely
the same stuff going on, right?
I've had a chance to study cases, of course, in France, all over Europe, and in South America, and of course in the U.S.
What's the weirdest case you've ever studied?
I'm not sure weird is the right term for it. The most stimulating from a scientific point of view is a case in France in which a farmer was starting his tractor at 6 o'clock in the morning, and he saw something in his field some distance away, and he thought it was a helicopter or maybe a strange car that shouldn't have been there in his field. So he walked over, and all of a sudden he was paralyzed. He saw 2 small creatures. They were not quite the ones that you have here. They were very small, but they had normal heads, and they had normal human features. But he was paralyzed, and they started speaking to each other in some strange language, went back into the object took off. The interesting thing is that there were traces left. Those traces were studied by various agencies of the French government. There was no question he was not lying. The traces could not be duplicated. And he was paralyzed for 20 minutes after the object left, which is very interesting from the point of view of the effect of the kind of radiation that object may have been creating. And this is a very common report on the part of witnesses, this feeling of paralysis.
Right. Stay tuned, because our next guest
I first observed it out the left window of the cab, and I thought it was a conventional aircraft at the time. However, just a second or so later, it became obvious it wasn't a conventional type aircraft, and attracted my interest to the point of picking up the camera and actually taking a photo of it as it crossed the road in front of me. And I simply took the camera and aimed a quick picture, and these type come out and are developed out of the camera. Another sequence followed as the object moved across and out the other side, the right-hand side. and it was removed. All of these photos develop outside the camera. Well, this photo is the number 1 photo taken through the windshield of the cab, followed by a number 2 photo out of the right-hand window, and then, of course, the number 3 photo. I think they're remarkable photographs, not because I took them, but because what they portray and show. And as far as the rest of it, I could care less as to who believes what, because I know what I saw.
I had the camera ready because I wanted a photograph of these trees and the obstruction. I knew it was something different. It was not a, definitely not a helicopter or an aircraft as we know them. And it didn't seem to have too much altitude, and it crossed over in front of me. And I picked up the camera and took the first picture at that point. And it continued to hover in a slow motion to the right side, where I got 2 more pictures.
Rex made copies of the photos and shared them with friends. As word spread, a local newspaper did a story on the photos. The story drew the attention of top-secret military officials.
The people who identified themselves as being from NORAD came.
The men asked for Rex's original Polaroids. They didn't know he'd made copies.
But they sort of demanded them. And so I let them have the pictures. I thought, why not?
In the meantime, Rex also made history in a different way, when the photos reached a wide, young audience.
And when the Encyclopedia Britannica yearbook came out in '66, they published a photo of it, and they classified it under spacecraft.
But the originals themselves, they were gone for 28 years. Until one afternoon not long ago, when they showed up in Rex Heflin's mailbox.
The phone rang, and there was a lady's voice on the phone advising me to check my mailbox. And I checked the mailbox, and there was the small tan or manila mailing type envelope in there, and with my name on it, and it had those photos in it. There was no postage. It was delivered privately.
Have you seen any other UFOs since?
No.
How and when did you get...
Not even after 3 martinis.
Many UFO sightings are easily explained. Yet when more than one person claims to see the same object at the same time from different vantage points, the reports become harder to dismiss. Hudson County, New Jersey, the town of North Bergen, a middle-class suburb across the river from New York City. Its residents are hard-working, educated professionals who tend to be realists. This is also a place where there have been persistent claims of alien and UFO sightings. George Obarski owned a Manhattan liquor store and drove the same route back to his home in North Bergen, New Jersey, every night for decades. At 3 a.m. on the morning of January 12, 1975, as he was driving through the local park, his radio reception suddenly became distorted. He related the subsequent events to UFO investigator Bud Hopkins, who recorded his story with a portable tape recorder.
Well, I would say that thing was 30 feet across. It was a big thing.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be, I would say, maybe 6 feet high. You know, like a pancake. Yeah. It was blown up and like a pancake.
Right.
And the thing landed right ahead of me.
He described small figures who got out. He said they looked like kids in snowsuits. They were each one carrying a kind of a squarish receptacle and a long spoon-like shovel. They dug soil samples extremely quickly, spooning up the dirt, put it in the little satchels, and got back in the craft. He said they moved incredibly fast, like kids coming down a fire escape. And the thing took off. He was absolutely terrified, stunned. He didn't know what he was seeing.
Even after George Obarski made it home, he was still shaken, terrorized by what he had encountered.
I was scared to death.
Yeah.
You know, I was sweating, and I immediately made some tea. Boy, after that, I turned on this radio and I took 2 aspirins. Hey, you know, I was scared. Right. But then, just either I'm going crazy or something awful wrong with me.
George Obarski died in 1990. His son, Frank, remembers his father's story well.
What he described was a big saucer-like object, which, for want of any better explanation, you'd have to call a UFO, unidentified flying object, that came down, was sort of disc-like on the bottom, had very strange lighting, sort of glowed. The clincher was, after it landed, my father described himself as being basically frozen, almost in fear. And this is a guy who'd been robbed a lot in the liquor store in New York and knew what fear was like and had coped with it a lot. But he said he was genuinely frightened of this thing.
Bud Hopkins tried to corroborate George Obarski's story with other witnesses, including a doorman who worked at the Stonehenge apartment building across the street from the park.
I realized it was a big apartment building there, so I spent weeks trying to locate the doorman. I called him, and I remember my adrenaline rushing when this man said, "I will never forget it. This flying saucer came down and landed in the park," and I watched the thing come down. Then he started describing what it looked like, and it was an identical description to George.
After writing about Obarski's story in the Village Voice newspaper, Bud Hopkins kept looking for other possible witnesses.
One family came to light afterwards. They were living about 5 blocks away, seeing this object coming down the street, maybe 40 feet up, slanted. And they described it as if it was looking in their windows. And even though the woman in the family was ill, she ran outside in her nightgown, bare feet, and the father and the children ran out, and they followed this thing down the street.
A North Bergen schoolteacher, Ann Karlovich, says she listened skeptically as her daughters described the telltale evidence in the park on the day after the alleged incident.
Back in 1975, we had heard about this incident that there was a flying saucer in the park. So my daughter and her friends went down to the park to see what was going on, and they all kept running back saying they saw rings and burn marks in the grass in the field down near the softball field. And they told me the whole story about broken windows, that the Stonehenge had a large glass facade and it was broken by a beam of light that hit it. The kids were awfully excited about it.
Frank Obarski also went to the site with his father. He knew him as a practical man, so it was difficult for him to understand why his dad held to such a seemingly irrational story.
He didn't show much interest in things that couldn't be proved or disproved, or that didn't apply to everyday life. And this was one of those categories that he felt didn't apply to everyday life. So I had a lot of trouble reconciling my knowledge of my father with this story he was telling me.
He said, you know, I've lived a long life as honorably and truthfully as I was able to. And he said, a man doesn't do that for over 70 years and then throw it all away by making up some foolishness.
The North Bergen area had a history of UFO claims prior to Obarski's alleged alien sighting, and the reports are still coming in. Since the alleged sighting made famous by George Obarski in 1975, residents of North Bergen, New Jersey have reported seeing dozens of UFOs on a number of different occasions. In the early evening of July 6, 1986, Wall Street investor Ron Lee and artist Nanetta Nappy were enjoying the sunset on her terrace in the Stonehenge apartment complex.
I just said, what the heck is that? Out in the sky, I was just staring out, and I saw something that was unidentifiable to me. And Nanetta and I looked at it, and it wasn't moving. It didn't have any sound. And we just followed it with our eyes and tried to guess what that could be.
Had it had a motor sound to it, I would not have been suspicious, but the fact that it was so silent and large, it was a large-shaped object, it drew my attention even further. I might have just ignored it. It was oval, and it had 3 sets of lights underneath it.
And it just kept stationary in the sky for 5-10 minutes, and then at some point, it just took off and went south in a fashion without gaining momentum, but just going straight off with accelerated speed beyond what I was used to seeing. And shortly after that, very shortly, we heard noise and then saw military aircraft following it.
The next day, sightings of this UFO were reported in the press. Nonetta was not one of the people who had called the local officials.
Now, you don't want to talk about things that people could think that you're a little strange thinking about it. I was in denial about it because I didn't want to accept or believe that this thing was, did not have a rational reason behind it.
2 years later, in the same area of New Jersey, disc jockey Dave D'Elia claims he witnessed an unidentified flying object on St. Patrick's Day in 1988 over North Hudson Park. D'Elia says he was driving home when he noticed something in the sky. He pulled over.
As I'm standing there, it's getting closer and closer. No noise at all. But the lights that made up the triangle were white. The diamond were white and green.
D'Elia returned to his car and followed the UFO down the parkway for several miles, noting the shape of the craft.
The shape of the UFO was a diamond shape like this. Where my thumbs are was basically the part that was coming toward me. That's how it was flying.
In 1993, 5 years after D'Elia's reported 1988 sighting, another North Bergen resident, Ann Karlovich, who had been skeptical of the earlier Obarski sighting, claimed she too was an eyewitness to an unidentified flying object.
I saw this very kind of a elliptical shaped large light shining, and I looked at it and I said, gee, wow, what is that? And it seemed to be moving very slowly, but I wasn't sure. And then as I turned my car around, it was gone. So I came into the house, and my son-in-law and daughter were here. And I said to Joe, my son-in-law, I said, wow, did I see something strange on Boulevard East? And he said, I saw it too.
It had a sort of eerie glow. It looked metallic and was very well lit, like with a fluorescent, bright flood kind of light. As I recall it to be a blimp-like object, like an elongate, like an ellipse, elliptical sphere, if you will.
Joe Bass remembers reading the next day in the local newspaper that all the blimps in the area had been grounded due to foggy weather.
I know what it wasn't. I know that it wasn't some sort of lights on the clouds or a meteor or anything like that. I suspect it was either some kind of government aircraft, some Air Force kind of aircraft that they don't let on that they have, an aircraft of this type. It wasn't a plane, it wasn't a helicopter, it was like a blimp type object.
It is quite clear that people in this area believe they are seeing UFOs. But are they alien spacecraft? Since World War II, reports of UFO sightings have grown to merit a system of classification, a way to categorize people's claims. This method was developed by an astronomy professor at Northwestern University, J. Allen Hynek. It was he who coined the phrase, close encounter of the third kind, to describe human contact with an alien. Philip Imbrogno collaborated with Hynek on his final book in 1987. They collected accounts of East Coast sightings, which Imbrogno says number into the thousands.
As I began to investigate more cases, I began to realize that I was just touching the tip of the iceberg. Actually, in a period of 5 years, there were 7,000 sightings. Now, they were made by people who are pillars in the community. Police officers, pilots, lawyers, educators, scientists, executives for major corporations, all saw an object that they considered to be larger than a football field flying overhead.
Psychologist Hubert Dolezal maintains that UFO believers are mistaken in what they think they are seeing.
What we're looking at is a perceptual phenomenon where the background information is either dark conditions or dusk conditions, and where there's very little visual structure against which the object appears. Add to that the question of, does this person have myopia, nearsightedness, and astigmatism, suffers from any other kind of visual defect? And now you're looking at the question of not only unidentified moving objects, but unidentified stationary objects.
I know what I saw. That's the only thing I can say. I know I saw something that didn't look like anything else I had seen before.
Syndicated columnist Sally Deering grew up in the North Bergen area. She's heard dozens of the local UFO stories, and she thinks any belief in aliens and UFOs is ridiculous.
They jump to UFO, and I think they jump to that too quickly. There's a lot of ways you could explain a lot of these things that we see, and I think that people just want to believe, they'll go from A to alien before they'll go to A to B. And I remember back in the early 70s how we would read books, Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land, Kurt Vonnegut's books, and we would accept science fiction as some kind of metaphor for what we were living in at the time. This sort of feeling of being outcast in a society.
Are alienated people confusing science fiction with reality? According to Professor Dolezal, those who claim to see aliens and UFOs may be experiencing a psychological need to be a part of a trend, something bigger than themselves, thus latching on to observations which have little or no supporting evidence.
What I do believe is going on, it's the proverbial bandwagon effect, that it's popular to be included and to be part of this. It is becoming more and more accepted. The onus of you're nuts, or there's something wrong with your brain, or you're a liar has been vastly decreased. I think people are more open to the possibility. I believe every human being wants to be part of something that is special, that is important, that is exciting. Certainly with the advent of human beings becoming more sophisticated in terms of space travel, our own yearnings to be in space and to populate other planets, I think all of that has fueled, and reasonably so, this entire belief system and movement.
Although skeptics like Professor Dolezal give compelling reasons why people think they see things which are not really there, believers remain irritated by the general skepticism they encounter. Franco Barsky is still perplexed by his father's alleged experience.
It really bothered him that people thought he was lying about this. And that's the thing that I find the most compelling about this whole story, and the thing that I have the most trouble with.
I suppose it is frightening because it's the unknown. Things that are not really part of the known are frightening.
One of the extraordinary things we learned from these pilots is that when their carrier battle group deployed across the Atlantic, they continued to encounter these things all the way across the Atlantic into the Middle East and even over Syria.
We hear so much about off the coast of Florida and especially Virginia. People think that's the only place these unusual things happen. It's not true. It's all over the world where we have battle groups. So this isn't anything that just is limited to the United States. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
Whoever's left standing when the music stops, it's not going to be a comfortable position to be in as a super rigorous scientific skeptic saying there's no there, who's been saying there's no there for the last 75 years, right?
From what I hear you guys saying, there's something.
Yes.
Oh, there's.
I'm curious, do you believe that extraterrestrial intelligence has visited planet Earth?
I think you can go a step further. It hasn't just visited, it's been here a long time, and it's still here. And it has basically, people talk about the wow signal, looking for extraterrestrial intelligence. The wow signal is that people see it on an almost regular basis. That's the communication that's already here.
And that statement seems so incredible that it's tough to believe, right? Like, people hear that, and maybe a lot of people here hear that, and they don't believe it. And so I'm curious, if you had to assign a probability to that statement, that you believe extraterrestrial intelligence has visited this planet, what probability would you assign?
100%. And that's not...
They wanted this information. They deserve it.
It's their information. It doesn't belong to the Army or the Department of Defense. It's theirs. If it's classified, take the classification off and give it to them.
Who's covering it up now? I mean, is there any one organization?
Look, I always say this. Now, here's what I say. The government is so big and so vast that if you leave it alone, it'll cover itself up.
March 13th, 1997. This event called Lights Over Phoenix. What did you see?
Well, I saw a huge craft just kind of come right over Squaw Peak. That was, it was just breathtaking, and unquestionably it was a UFO, which means unidentified flying object.
Doesn't mean we're being visited.
Well, it's nothing like anything I've ever seen.
And you're an Air Force guy.
Yeah, and a pilot. Got a lot of hours flying, so it was pretty breathtaking.
The last time we spoke, there were two comments that you said that stood out to me. Well, one was the somber heard around the world, in a sense, and then you clarified that, or you added to that by saying sobering. Well, I was wondering, we can get to that. And then also you mentioned that the charlatans of the world will be shown to be charlatans. And I, again, don't know much about this UFO community, but people in the comments were saying, did he mean Stephen Greer? So, why don't you comment on that? You can be as diplomatic as you like. I know that you're a relatively diplomatic person.
Yeah, let me start with by somber or sobering. Imagine everything you've been taught, whether it's through Sunday school or through regular formal education in school, or what our political leaders have told us, and yes, even maybe our mothers and fathers around the dinner table have told us, or maybe at bedtime, about who we are, right? Our background and our past. What if all of that turned out to be not entirely accurate? In fact, the very history of our species, the meaning, what it means to be a human being, and our place in this universe. What if all that is now in question? What if it turns out that a lot of the things that we thought were one way aren't? Are we prepared to have that honest question with ourselves? Are we prepared to recognize that we're not at the top of the food chain, potentially? That we're not the alpha predator, that we are maybe somewhere in the middle? It's interesting because I was having a discussion with a friend not too long ago. Really, we call them graybeards in the government. Really, really smart guy. I'm not going to mention his name, but I was talking to him probably a couple months ago. And this is a guy who was always paid to solve the hard problems for the U.S. government. Cold War. How do we solve that, right? How do we do these big things? How do we go in and beat the Russians at their own game? So this guy I respect tremendously. And we had a conversation. He said, Lou, mankind's been around for a little while. And for most of that time, mankind's been around. We've been smack in the middle of the food chain. We've been, we ate a lot of things, and a lot of things ate us. And that's just the bottom line. And about 70,000 years ago, something fundamentally changed. Something changed. And our species was instantly catapulted to the very top of our planet as far as predatory animals. And now all of a sudden, we became the most feared. We were the most lethal and the most successful. In fact, most of the large species that existed on this planet went extinct because of us, believe it or not, because we started eating all of it. There were a couple species that did very, very well with our ascension, our immediate ascension. And we brought a couple species with us. The dog is an example, where the dog species benefited greatly with mankind's ascension as the alpha predator and wound up succeeding as well, doing very well off of that. That changed the entire global landscape of our planet almost overnight. Large animals went extinct. because of us. What if it turns out that there's another species that is even higher on that ladder than we are? Do we need the social institutions that we have today? Will we need governmental and religious organizations that we have today if it turns out that there is something else or someone else that is technologically more advanced and perhaps from an evolutionary perspective more advanced? Have we been wasting our time all this time? Or are we doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing? Does it turn out that mankind is in fact just another animal in the zoo? Or, because we thought ourselves as a zookeeper before, but maybe we're just another exhibit inside the zoo. What would that mean to us? So when I say sombering and sobering, I mean that there's going to come a point in this conversation where we're going to have to do a lot of reconciling with ourselves, whatever that means, from whatever philosophical background you have. This is going to impact every single one of us the same and yet equally and yet differently. And I think that's important. Do we find ourselves in a situation where history may have to be rewritten?
Think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
They're all over the damn place. They're in our midst, and they are family. We're related to them because they were the ones that had a hand in establishing us as a hybrid race 100,000 years ago. And that hybridization is still underway, it's still happening, even as we sit here and speak. It hasn't stopped. It's underway. They have different agendas. Some of them are nice folks, and some of them are not. As I said, they have different agendas. But they're all around. The one in the upper left-hand corner there is another self-luminous object that moves all over the place. That object is over 2,000 miles long. It is an artificially constructed object, over 2,000 miles long. It's about 500 miles in diameter. Can you imagine a technology and a society that can build an object 2,000 miles long for 500 miles in diameter? Oh, this is an object that flew up and knocked the Soviet satellite out of orbit some years ago. The Soviets sent up damn first-rate satellite.
No one believed me, even from those few people that I was able to share this experience with, that this is true. But luckily, with the development of the ufology and many great people out there that are doing the research and providing the video evidence. So as you can see, this is on infrared. That is why his black and white is from STS-63, and they are trying to locate the Mir space station. They cannot locate the Mir space station because more than 100 objects are appearing and disappearing from the radar. Those are the same type of craft that I observed on the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And those are those balls of light that I was observing in those times, as you can see clearly, creating intelligent formation.
And they wanted to take pictures of one of the moons. They wanted to take pictures of Phobos, one of the two moons of Mars. And while they were taking pictures, this object comes up from the surface of Mars, bumps the Soviet Phobos satellite, knocks it out of orbit, and it crashes. Next picture, please. What you see there is a picture of Phobos, the moon, and I mean artificial moon of Mars. And below it, you see an object that the Soviets said measured roughly 15 kilometers in length. An artificial object near Phobos, the moon, 15 kilometers in length. Next picture, please. That's the moon, 12 miles in diameter. The Soviets planned to land on it. Well, someone else said, no, you're not going to do that. But that is a picture of Phobos, which they've all concluded is an artificial satellite. This photograph was taken by your own NASA Apollo 13 guys on their trip to the moon that didn't work out too well. And many of you may have heard rumors about the story, but Apollo 13 had a small nuclear device aboard. And they had been told by the guys that ran NASA that they were going to land on the surface, going to place this small nuclear device. And then when they all left and came back aboard and came back, they were going to detonate it and study the reverberations of this nuclear device, study the seismology of the moon, because they've been convinced for some years that the moon is basically hollow. It appears to be somewhat of an artificial satellite. Well, they plan to detonate this nuclear device, and the others said, no, you're not going to do that. We'll get back to that picture again, please. All right. The object you see there in the middle, over 2,000 miles long. It's an artificial, I assume metallic, object, probably crammed with guys. And that object followed our Apollo 13 all the way to the moon, around and back. Now, whether they were trying to make sure the Apollo 13 guys got home safely or what, whether they were the ones responsible for Apollo 13's little accident, which kept them from landing on the moon and placing that nuclear device, who knows? We may find out someday. But here you have an artificial object in orbit. Now, I've spent some time aboard aircraft carriers with my kid. We have carriers with 5,000 men in the crew, 1,000 feet long, 150 aircraft, for snack bars, dining rooms, accommodations, this and that. Can you imagine the accommodations on an object over 2,000 miles long? Next slide. It's the second photograph. Same objects, but a second photo in the sequence. That's the Big Mother, and I use that, no pun intended. There are other objects out there. There's a disc-shaped object, and then there's the other object. Then above it is the moon out there. But there's that one big object out there. I'm sure they got a crew of hundreds, maybe a couple of thousand. The ones I refer to as the others. I hate the term alien. I hate the term UFO. There are no UFOs. We've known what they are for years and years and years. Some of them are ours. Some of them are theirs. There are no unidentified flying objects out there. They're all identified. I've tried to impress upon you the seriousness of it, the seriousness of the cover-up and the lies they've been telling you, the importance of why you need to know as much as you can know. And you need to be presented with the material because, damn it, you all deserve the truth. You have a right to know and you have a need to know.
You said you saw literally hundreds of unidentifiable flying objects.
Yes, they were flying quite high. How high we couldn't tell because we couldn't get anywhere near their altitude. But they were either very large craft way up or smaller craft still well above what we could get to.
For a day and a half, all of this happened. But then no one wanted to talk about it.
Well, we sent a report forward on it, and the answer that finally came back months later was they were probably high-flying seed pods, which didn't sound very logical.
While supervising flight testing at Edwards Air Force Base, his military camera crew actually filmed an unidentified saucer-shaped object landing near the site.
As they were sitting there filming, a little saucer came from, I say little saucer, it was a saucer, came flying over their heads, put down 3 little landing gear and landed right out on the dry lake bed. And they picked up their cameras and started over toward it, filming as they went. And when they got in fairly close to it, it lifted up, put the gear back in the wheel wells, tipped up, and took off at a great rate of speed. And so they came into my office and told me what had happened, and I sent them over to develop the film. And then had to go through all the proper regulations of reporting this. And we wound up having to send the film forward to Washington in the base jet airplane. And I don't know whether anyone's ever seen it since.
Now, the vehicle that you just described, how similar was it to the very first sighting that you had back in 1951?
Quite similar. It was basically the same plan-form vehicle. They were double saucer, lenticular. But if you're going to be going in and out of atmospheres like Earth or other places might have, you certainly need a little more aerodynamic type of vehicle. And the saucer has the capability of going through the air at tremendous rates of speed and handling the bow and trailing wave without making shock waves. So it can be very silent while traveling at big rates of speed through the atmosphere. A friend of mine who's a captain on a major airline at night was flying along, noticed this. Suddenly a big glow came off his left wing, and he looked out and this big saucer was sitting right off their wing. And so he turned slide toward and it moved away, and turned back and it moved back in position, and turned to his co-pilot and said, "Do you see what I see?" And he said, "Oh God, yeah, I do." And it trailed along with him for quite a period of time, then tipped up, climbed very steeply away. It was on Jim McDivitt's Gemini 7 mission, where they saw this glint of something metallic off in the distance. And he reported, and nobody had it listed on the ground, so he tried getting a picture of it, but the sun, unfortunately, was glinting off of it so bright. All you got is just a glint. There was no detail on what it was, but never any further sighting at all on it. Well, the letter to the UN was in conjunction with a meeting that I had with Kurt Waldheim and the Security Council of the UN to try to encourage the UN to establish a committee to start comparing notes and data and information, and to really look into all of this from an unbiased, neutral point of view.
Here's a quote from your letter. "I believe that these extraterrestrial vehicles and their crews are visiting this planet from other planets and are obviously a little more advanced than we are here on Earth." And are you saying that's exactly why governments have been trying to keep this information private, because of that obvious advancement?
Very possibly, right.
And a remarkable story told by Janet Kay provides the background.
On the night of November 2nd, 1975, I was sitting here doing my homework, and I looked out the window, and right above the blue building, I saw a UFO come down out of the sky. And it landed behind the building, and behind the building is a football field. It landed there.
There were two other witnesses, Janet's mother, Helen, and her brother, Jerry.
A lot of people in town saw it. I don't know how many people saw it and told us the next day that they saw this thing up in the sky.
In the sky.
As we pulled around the driveway here, I noticed up by the blue shed over there that there was something in the sky. So I pulled out of the driveway, and I said, "Turn down here, we can maybe get closer to it." So we just went over this way. And then you could just see it real good before the trees. It was definitely right there. And we just drove up here, and by that stop sign near the railroad tracks, there's a fence across, so we couldn't go any further. And we just noticed it. It was just coming right in front of the trees, and we just stood here a minute till we saw it just glide over the top of the trees, and then it was gone.
Well, a couple days later, after we saw the UFO go down, I saw a lot of people over here looking at something, so I came over here and I found this big brown spot on the football field where the grass had been burnt. As you can see, the blue building is right over there, and the burn spot is right here. And it's right in line with the window we saw the UFO come down from.
Now, this happens to be the sample from the Medford site, number 2, which does show some strange luminescence properties. And so I'd want to make sure that the sample that I'm dealing with is not in itself radioactive. and I don't find that it is. I don't see any evidence of increased radioactivity.
Yeah, at the time, it wasn't scary. It didn't frighten me when I looked out the window and I saw it. I didn't get scared or anything. But afterwards, when I realized that what I had seen was unexplainable, that's when it started to get scary. And then when they found the patch on the football field, well, that got a little worse.
Furnace ready to be inserted here into the light chamber. And now we've inserted the sample, which is on the electric furnace, into the chamber, and we're going to start heating it.
It's been 6 months since we saw the UFO go down, and as you can see, the bird spot is still visible. I just wish I knew what it was. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I mean, if it was something, you know, from another country or something the Army was putting up in the air, I wish they'd come and tell us that this was it, and not just leave us out here thinking that it was something from some outer space place.
I'd be satisfied with any kind of an explanation.
Well, we're going to start off here by looking then at the glow curves, which I ran about 2 months ago on the Medford site. And if we look at the curve at the center of the site, we see that there's just a very small rise here. That is, the luminescence peak is very small. At the edge of the site, as we proceed along here, at the edge of the site, we discover the intense luminescence. Now, this luminescence that we are observing is apparently the result of some sort of radiation effect. It looks, at least, as though that particular sample at the edge of the site has been subjected to some kind of high-energy radiation.
If I had never seen a UFO, I wouldn't believe in it. I wouldn't believe me if I were you. Because I have nothing to show you. I can't say, you know, I saw this. I just have nothing. All you have is my word.
But there is more than just Mrs. K's word. In a recent Gallup poll, 15 million Americans claim to have seen a UFO. 15 million. The same poll showed that 51% of the adult population is convinced that flying saucers are real. For those who haven't seen one, this is a recreation of what Carol Critchfield saw on a hilltop in Big Chimney, West Virginia. The artist used the same technique that a police artist would use in recreating the features of a suspect from the descriptions of witnesses. And this is what Philip Baker saw on the town road in Mellon, Wisconsin. Helen Kay and her children saw this object land on a football field in Medford, Minnesota. The last systematic attempt by the U.S. government to investigate UFOs was conducted by the Air Force and was called Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book ended in 1968. The Air Force had by then investigated more than 11,000 UFO sightings and found explanations for all but 676. The Air Force seemed to have no interest in the sightings it could not readily attribute to earthly phenomena. Perhaps it's time to approach the question of UFOs again, without bias. For we can only hope that if we are being studied by aliens, it is with more thoroughness and care than we have focused on them.
This craft than over Israel. The inexplicably eerie UFOs caught on tape over the Holy Land are some of the most extraordinary images ever recorded. As incredible as it sounds, some experts even believe they are proof we are being visited by extraterrestrials. September 1996. This peculiar and fascinating image was filmed by a resident of an area called Kfar Saba. When the craft first appeared, it resembled an apple with a strange top and bottom. Amazingly, this incredible UFO was seen again in a different configuration the next evening. After it appeared a third night, the videographer marveled at its intricate designs. Look here at the many forms it seems to take. One night, there are 3 lights on top. The second night, only 1. The third night, the lights take on the shape of a crown, and the entire object shrinks in size and turns a deep shade of orange. UFO researcher Michael Lindemann has never come across anything quite like this.
Seeing the video of this thing, I must say it's very impressive, and I can't imagine what it is. It doesn't look like any prosaic object that I can think of. It doesn't bear any reasonable resemblance to a conventional aircraft of any kind.
We showed the intriguing video to Dr. Bruce Maccabee. He offers a possible explanation for what we're seeing.
The question is this image shape actually the shape of the object, or has it been modified by the camera? If it's on automatic focus, it likely tries to focus at the wrong distance. When that happens, you get an image in which the shape of the image is related to the aperture of the camera rather than the actual shape of the object.
But how is it possible that the same individual, using the same camera, captured 3 separate images on 3 separate nights? If so, what are we really looking at? Maccabee cannot say for sure.
This thing right here suggests to me that the actual shape of the object has not got round things like that on it. It was a very bright light, which may well be a UFO. But the shape of the object is probably not this shape.
But this amazing flying structured craft has no earthly explanation. It was seen over the small farming village of Kibbutz Hatzor for 3 consecutive nights in August of 1996. This video, shot by a young resident of the kibbutz, shows a bizarre-looking, partially lit craft with strange red markings and rectangular shapes. When the camera zooms in, we see what appears to be a light on the craft's left side take on amazing structure. The structure, some say, resembles a huge flying building with hallways. 17-year-old Amiche Shoah was stunned to be awakened by the strange, bright object in the night sky. He watched in amazement as it hovered above for hours. He waited for its return the next night, video camera in hand. By the 3rd night, word of the strange craft had spread, and some 60 members of the kibbutz came out to see it in all its glorious color. This time, Amiche's batteries failed, but he managed to film the odd craft again using a neighbor's camera. Look what he managed to capture on tape. The structure is so massive that the illuminated portion is said to represent only 5 to 7% of its actual size. Is this the design of some otherworldly architect? As incredible as it sounds, some UFO researchers claim it could be housing alien inhabitants, giant aliens as described in the Bible.
No one has ever seen one like this before. So it was captured on 2 separate nights, 1 separate morning. Over 100 people saw it.
Barry Chamish is one of the most respected UFO investigators in Israel today. He believes that this is one of the most extraordinary UFOs ever caught on tape.
What we're dealing with Hatzor is a very large UFO. This thing is not just a round disc. This thing's got windows. It's got 2 rows of windows or vents, or who knows what on earth they're shaped, because they are very odd, offbeat squares. And they managed to get a close-up of these vents. I mean, really close. You're right inside them. And they could be teeth for all you know. And you have no idea what's attacking you. But this orange structure, I believe it's energy vents or something. Something to do with venting energy.
The kibbutz is near an Israeli Air Force base, but Chamish is convinced this is no military craft.
Everything is wrong. The dimensions are wrong. The squares aren't quite squares. If it was a military vehicle, it hasn't come back. It's never been, the likes of it have never been seen ever again.
Then what was hovering above Israel for 3 consecutive nights that summer?
Obviously, if this is up in the sky, there's nothing that's supposed to be up in the sky that looks quite like that. It apparently is some object which has got that sort of a size to it in this level of blow-up. When they zoom in and get a structured image out of this, it's just plain, it doesn't look like anything that I've ever seen. Doesn't look like any ordinary UFO, that's for sure, but it certainly doesn't look like an airplane or a blimp, balloons or whatever. This would have to be considered to be unknown.
These unexplainable UFOs videotaped over Israel have never been sighted anywhere else in the world. Some believe the Holy Land may hold special significance for visitors from other worlds. Even Israeli television has broadcast images of possible UFOs on the news. However, according to Chamish, the Israeli military has secretly viewed UFOs as a possible threat.
Israel has never admitted to UFOs, and I know for a fact that our Air Force is chasing them constantly. I was in the Air Force. We were ordered not to tell anyone.
This extraordinary footage may actually show a UFO being tracked by an Israeli military jet. The video was shot by a student named Gil Bar.
I got my camera and zoom in on the object, and as I zoom in, the object began to get closer or brighter, and I didn't understand what it was.
But what happened next is even more baffling. Visually, it appears as though the objects are interacting. Notice how the two seem to be checking each other out. But who is following who? Is the plane a fighter jet attempting to achieve lock-on or awaiting further instruction from the ground? Or is the orb engaging the jet in a little fun? Finally, the two seem to cross paths before the jet flies out of frame.
It's an electronic cat and mouse game. You've got a high-flying surveillance plane throwing all this electronics on this disc, and this disc kind of bopping away from the waves or the beams. I think it was just playing with this plane.
But there was nothing playful about this dramatic UFO encounter recorded on September 28, 1996, near the town of Rosh Ha'im, not far from Tel Aviv. Could this be a UFO being shot down, or two rival UFOs engaged in battle? Chamish believes the craft involved are not of this world.
We don't have these.
Strange lights can be seen in the night sky above the Place Bonaventure Hotel. On November 7, 1990, a tourist floating in the hotel's 17-story rooftop pool saw something which set off a chain reaction. It was 7:20 p.m.
She saw a very hard aerial phenomenon, and she was surprised, so she asked the lifeguard to have a look at it.
Bernard Guénette has chronicled the events of that night.
She was also very surprised by what she was seeing, so she called the hotel security officer, and as soon as he saw the aerial phenomenon, was overwhelmed and called immediately the police.
Quelqu'un demandait, est-ce un objet non identifié?
Gilles Béliveau, a reporter with La Presse, was also dispatched to the scene. He happened to ride the hotel elevator with a policeman.
We were going up, you see. He asked, may I use my gun? You see, it was just a joke, and people were laughing. I was laughing. When we arrived together on the roof, he looked in the sky and he said, "Sacrement." He was astonished, like I was.
On a vu une forme ronde qui semblait métallique, qui projetait des faisceaux lumineux qui avaient 4 séries de toits forts. C'était gigantesque.
He decided that he have to call his big boss. And so the big director of all operation of the police that night arrived also on the scene and was overwhelmed by what he was seeing. So he called the RCMP.
I got here at the hotel at about 9 o'clock, and I came up, met Sergeant Masson and a lot of people around the pool who were looking up. On a des petites lumières en haut. I contacted the airport, the military. I talked to the colonel in charge of Saint-Hubert military operations, and I was told that there was no Canadian military operation going on. I also confirmed with Dorval and Mirabel if they had anything on radar, and they answered in the negative.
But yet you could see something there, and nobody could say
Absolutely.
what it was?
Yes, absolutely.
À ce moment-là, il y avait le mine de la Gauchetière qui était en construction. qui avait déjà, lui, ses tours, puis tout le système là, de grues pour monter les marchandises. Lui, il y avait beaucoup de grosses lumières blanches là, pour éclairer le chantier de construction. À ce moment-là, j'ai envoyé des policiers faire fermer les feux. Les phares, on les a fait éteindre. Puis ça n'a rien changé dans l'aspect du ciel. On voyait encore la forme ronde, on voyait encore les lumières tout le tour.
Then we had no answer. Some people were saying, yes, it is something from the space.
At 9 o'clock that night, Béliveau's colleague, Marcel Laroche, took this photograph of the apparition.
So it was a build-up, more and more witnesses, more and more action, and always the same. The phenomenon doesn't change.
The sighting had lasted almost 3 hours, from 7:20 to 10:10. The next morning, the La Presse story caused a sensation.
The morning after, I was working, and we had a lot of phone calls from media and also from various people out of the public. And we had nothing to answer, really, so I had to make a little investigation.
Marc Gélina is a meteorologist with Environment Canada and an amateur astronomer. He believes the lights which caused the commotion were nothing more than northern lights, technically an aurora borealis.
More than one people, at least 3 witness reports an aurora because they know aurora. And their description of the phenomena is the same as the other description from general witness. But somebody that don't know the sky well, which is not very skilled in reporting something in the sky, could be fooled by light in the sky.
Bernard Guenette wasn't so sure. He'd seen the lights himself that night while leaving his office in Old Montreal.
I saw that very hot light that was straight between these 2 buildings. It was a greenish light which looked like Borealis aurora, but was still doesn't move like these northern lights usually moves.
Guenette owns a computer company but devotes much of his spare time to the study of UFOs.
I decided to look into this case since a lot of witness was there. The quality of the witness was very good, and there were also photographic evidence that was there. So I said to myself, there's probably ways, with the collection of the meteorological data, the witnesses' testimony, and the photograph negative that could be maybe analyzed to determine if it was a light reflection or an object.
Guenette collaborated with Dr. Richard Haynes, a retired NASA research scientist in California. Haynes directed the research. Guenette collected the data and interviewed key witnesses who had been present on the roof of the hotel. But they were not the only people who saw something unusual that night. Pierre Comartin was driving home from work between 10:30 and 11 o'clock when something caught his attention.
I could see something, some kind of a flying object on top of the Olympic Tower right there, which is very well lit.
At first, he thought it was a promotional blimp surrounded by very bright lights.
And that thing was basically going east as I was. From here on, I figured out that this thing must have been pretty big, pretty darn big, because there was no blimp. I can't define the type of object. I can't. I've never seen anything like that.
Perplexed, he stopped here, near his home in Anjou, and continued his observation.
The lighting was definitely very strong. It was definitely big. I could hear from here, and this is where I heard the sound of the object. It was like some kind of a neat purring sound, just a little rhythmic purring. And the way this thing was moving was very strange because it was very static. It could be very static, wouldn't budge, and then it would like glide and go down very fast.
Comartin watched it hover in the vicinity of a neighborhood power station.
And basically the Hydro-Quebec station should be just about around there.
And I found out later on that during the time of his observation of that phenomenon above that station, a power failure occurred. And oddly enough, it is a route which goes to the, which feed the Long Point military base.
Guenette and Haynes published their report in 1992. Guenette had collected an exhaustive amount of data, much of it meteorological. Haynes had done the analysis. His conclusion? The evidence for the existence of a highly unusual, hovering, silent, large object is indisputable. There is nothing about these particular meteorological conditions that could produce an optical effect of the kind described by these witnesses.
It's a perfect inquiry, except the conclusion. The strongest aurora happens quite often like a crown, like a spot of light with rays emitting. So you look at that and look at this and remember, try to remember and try to make a drawing a day after or so. You will probably find something like that.
Why isn't there any record of this particular phenomenon that night?
Well, that's still some problems. There is no report, no observation by objective device of activity in the magnetosphere that night. But according to some authorities in Aurora, it could be a localized phenomena.
The photographs were also analyzed, and special tools at NASA were used to look at that. Okay, this is a 3D rendering of the negative, and this is what we are seeing here. And this is the scan which goes, through it to try to find out if we are talking about an object or just a reflection. Conclusion, it was an object.
This was no atmospheric, situation or... no, I saw an object. I saw light in an object.
Nobody talked about extraterrestrial. Everybody was very careful about this. But it was a very strong impression that something hard, something out of this world was present in this world.
I won't turn around and say, yes, now I believe in UFOs and life on other planets. But since the sighting on November, I have to admit that once in a while I'll look up there.